year learning to be a teacher.
Yes. Okay, so thank you, first of all, for being here for my presentation this morning. First, I want to start by telling you guys something some of you may already know, but most of you probably don't. And that is that I never in a million years wanted to be a teacher, ever. I did not grow up wanting to be a teacher. I did not go to college wanting to become a teacher. I was an English major in my undergraduate. And it's very easy for people to just assume that if you're an English major or you're a history major that you are going to become a history or an English teacher. And part of me and who I am is I am not about to step into a role that people expect me to step into. So there was that piece, and then I didn't want to become a teacher. And then the Christmas break before I graduated in May, I was at a conference and I met a girl that I had never spoken to in my life. She found out I was an English major, and one of the third things she says to me is, "Have you checked out the program at Virginia Tech?" And I was like, "What program?" You know? She said, "Well, you're an English major. They have a really great English teaching program there." And I had only known two things about this girl. One is that I had no idea who she was. Two is that she didn't even go to Virginia Tech, so I was wondering why she was saying this. But at that moment, an idea sparked, and a train of thought started moving through me. And this train of thought was that, okay, who do I want to be? Like, I have to decide who I want to be after this. There's a lot of pressure in graduating. And what I realized is that I did not want to be another face in the workforce. I didn't want to just step into a job behind another desk and just be another face. I wanted to impact people. I knew I wanted to work with people, but I didn't know that I wanted to work with youth specifically. And what I started to figure out is that I really want to have an impact on people who become part of the workforce of tomorrow. So that was kind of where this started moving for me. And I didn't really know the reason behind my desire to teach until about a month ago when another woman that I had never met before put it into words for me. I was sitting across the desk from the most enthusiastic middle school principal that I've ever met at a job interview in Baltimore, Maryland. I was in a room with about 100 other student-teacher candidates trying to interview for jobs. There were tables everywhere. Everybody was talking, so I'm like, okay, how am I going to make myself stand out? And she asked me, she said, okay, what's going to make you different in my classroom? Why do I want you to come teach in my middle school English classroom? What makes you different? And without hesitation, I said, I love the English subject area. I want to teach the content. It's exciting to me. But more than that, through English, I want to teach students how to find themselves and how to decide who they're going to be. Because the only people that they have to make the decision. Who do I want to be when I move on, as I move on through life? So I told her that I wanted to challenge them to decide for themselves and to learn about themselves and to learn about valuing themselves in my classroom. And she said, "Oh, so you're going to be the challenger." And she said, "You need to call yourself Miss C. And when you come to my school, just tell your kids you're Miss C. Because when you start calling yourself Miss C, you're the challenger and telling them that's who you are, then you'll start believing that about yourself, that you are that person." And so that's kind of the words behind my desire to become a teacher. And today I want to tell you a little bit about the journey that I have been on throughout this education experience and about how I became the teacher that's standing in front of you now, or the challenger, for better words. I will tell you that I'm going to kind of use the INTAS standards as a backbone for my journey. I'm not going to be specifically stating them as I go along, but they do form kind of a backbone to the journey that I'm about to take you guys on. So this is my homepage, but throughout this practice, one thing that I've really grown in is through my understanding of how students learn and develop, and in recognizing that no student learns through an identical process. So in understanding this, I came to the full recognition that students learn in different ways, and that all-inclusive modes of learning need to seek to benefit every single student in the classroom. So the crescendo of this development is clearly seen across the implementation of two instructional units. One was on messages in the media. The second was on the Diary of Anne Frank play, two completely different units. So although my intention to differentiate learning is strong throughout both units, you can definitely see how I grow in the ways that I actively seek to create differentiated learning assignments and forms of assessment as I move throughout both units. So in the first unit that I taught, Messages in the Media, students were always presented with multiple modes of reading. Throughout this program, we have been taught that not every student reads at grade level, not every student is confident in their ability to read, and that confidence can directly affect their actual ability to read. So it was very important to me in my first experience in the classroom to, especially because I'm learning about which students need more scaffolding in their reading, is to make sure that multiple modes of reading are available. So what I mean in that is that I always presented an auditory form of the text and a visual form of the text. So, for example, for my journal prompts, this is what I would often do. I would often have an image, and then I would superimpose the words on the image. And then I would have a student read the prompt out loud. So you have the visual, you have the audio, and something I found that was helpful is putting an image with the words, because that activates something in the brain. They're like, okay, so this one is, have you ever done something just because you saw someone else do it? That generated a lot of really interesting responses. But I have two people jumping at the same time. That's just kind of another way to try to scaffold that reading. So another way that I sought to respect each student's need for differentiated learning processes is through a lesson tryout that I experimented with during my Messages in the Media unit. In this lesson tryout, I allowed my two ELL students to write their journal entries in their own language. Now, in doing this, I realized that English language learners are learning the language, but they're also learning the content at the same time. So to be able to use their language to respond to the content acts as a scaffold to learning the content. And I actually continued using this not just in my lesson tryout, but I was doing an SOL practice with the students for a class period, and I was given the opportunity to take these two ELL students to the library and work alone with them. And what's expected in this SOL practice that we were doing is the students would read a prompt, take notes, and then write their essay to practice for the essay writing portion. So what I had them do is we read the prompt together, and then I asked them to write their notes and their outline in their own language. So they're responding to the prompt in their own language, and then I encouraged them to write the essay portion in English, so that they were using both languages, and they were also responding to the content through the language that they knew the best. And they were both really surprised that I asked them to do that. They were like, what? We're writing in our own language? And it was really funny to see their reaction, but it was very successful. Another way that I demonstrated progress in this area of recognizing learning differences is in the ways that I've used the classroom environment to scaffold learning. So creating opportunities for the learning environment to provide both individual and collaborative ways of learning, and to encourage self-motivation and positive social interaction was through group work projects. I used both group work and individual work projects. My first experience with group work was in my Messages in the Media unit, and we'll talk a little bit about the assessment here. I'm going to give it to you guys first. So what I'm giving you all is examples of this group work. And feel free to pass these around and look through them as I talk. And so I asked students to get in groups of 3 or 4, and I was the one who put together these groups, especially because I was learning about the students. I didn't know which students really got along, which didn't, and I had to move some groups around because of that. But so students were in groups of 3 and 4, and one thing I made sure to do is that in each group, I did kind of what Mallory did with her groups, is making sure that you have students of all ability levels working together, because I really wanted to encourage peer editing and peer tutoring in the group work. And in some ways that was very successful, but it was also some of my higher level students did come to me and were frustrated, obviously, with some of their group members. But it was a very positive experience. They were also given the power of choice. Most of your magazines are different, And within the magazine, there were several sections. There are magazine articles, which were the individual portion of the group assignment, so they've got individual grades for that. They worked together to create the cover. They created the advertisements, which demonstrated methods of propaganda. And they worked together to create the comics. So those were some fun ways to kind of use what we learned in class to work as groups and individually. As I mentioned before, my intent to seek differentiation in learning for all students was strong throughout both units, but it's clear that through the progression into the second unit of instruction, that I become more active in implementing multiple versions of assignments and assessments. So, in saying that, I want to say that it is important that you all know that I hold all students to the same standards. I'm not going to lower my standards for a student. All students are expected to meet the standards. If they don't, then I have to consider what I'm doing as a teacher and really reflect on that. So while there were different modes of assessing, all students would be assessed on the same material and expected to know the same material. So in the Diary of Anne Frank play unit, I used various forms of assessment. So their project for the unit was a compare and contrast essay on how two different characters from the play reacted to their situation of being in hiding during the Holocaust, and we used the play as evidence for that. So it was an individual assignment. For my struggling readers and reluctant learners, I assigned them the two characters that they would be required to write the paper on. For my higher level academic performers, I gave them several choices but did not allow them to write on the same characters that my reluctant learners were using. So that during class, I would really heavily scaffold that the information that I talked about in class for the reluctant learners and struggling learners. And then the higher level students had to work a little bit more to really learn about their characters. So both students are writing a compare and contrast essay. Both students have the same rubric. Both students are expected to write the same thing, but I'm scaffolding a little bit more for my reluctant learners. Another way in the same unit is through a test, vocabulary test that we did. And one way that I differentiated is it's the same test on the same words, but what I did differently was I provided a word bank for my struggling readers, and I also include a lot more context clues. My sentences are a little bit longer where they have to fill in the blank so that they have a little bit more to work with in terms of finding out which word needs to go there. And then also on the back of, on the second part of this, I asked them to write 5 meaningful sentences using the vocab words, which means don't write Sam is obtuse. You have to tell me why Sam's obtuse, right? But they were allowed to choose any of the words on the list. They were not required to use specific words. Now, for higher level students, I did not provide a word bank for the first section, and I also didn't work to provide a whole bunch of context clues. Had to make them work a little bit harder. Also, in the 5 meaningful sentences section, I give them the words to write the sentences with. So they don't get a choice. They're expected to know these words and use these words. I did this so that I could see them work a little bit harder, maybe, but still my reluctant learners were expected to use the vocabulary words, but I wanted to see them express their knowledge in their own way. So that's how I worked to seek differentiation there. As a teacher, I believe that all students need to be respected as individuals whose interests are valued in the classroom. Sure, not every student is going to pay attention 100% of the time. Not every student loves English. In fact, if I do a poll, probably most of them say they don't like it. But those facts only push me in understanding my responsibility as a teacher to make sure that I do my part to engage them in the best way that I can. So one way that I did this was in using multiple innovative applications of content in various instructional strategies and planning thoroughly for my lessons to kind of get them involved. So in my messages in the media unit, students were always really interested because I was always using examples and illustrations that are current. So I also used a lot of varied texts. So I used video as a text. I used magazine articles as a text, songs as a text. here is an example of me teaching using technology, but here we go.
Alright, so when we watch this, we are going to be thinking about these questions. What does this commercial say teenagers are like? Do you agree with how this teenager is portrayed? And does this generalization fit you? Okay? Those are the questions that we will be thinking about. This is our first one, okay?
I'm son. As you will know, I can barely focus on reading at a time. So between mowing and lawn,
So this is the first of two clips that my students are watching today that are going to demonstrate how the media can often portray people their age. This particular commercial, the main character, Mayhem, is supposed to be the teenage son. So after this, students are going to be asked to answer specific questions through writing about what the media says about them.
Okay, so this is an example of the types of text and trying to use different applications of the content. So another way that I sought to use research to inform my lesson was through a lesson that I used to bridge my messages in the media unit to my unit on the Diary of Anne Frank. So in this, I taught a lesson on propaganda that was used during the Holocaust. What I did to make it relevant to them was to say, okay, if you were a German youth during this time, how would you be targeted by Hitler and the Nazi regime in terms of propaganda? So what I did was I focused on the music that Hitler used in, they had like the German youth, which was like a boys and girls club, but the songs that they would sing and how this was used to influence the youth. And this took a lot of research. The research that I did for this one-day plan taught me so much, but it also taught my students more than I had originally planned as well. And so what I did with this is I played some songs, I gave some personal testimonies from people who were members of Hitler's youth, and I used information from the past, but then I brought it to the present. I said, okay, what about the music that you listen to? What are the lyrics that you find yourself singing in the car even though you didn't try to memorize the lyrics? What is the messages that you're using? And to be a little bit more specific, I used the song Pumped Up Kicks by Foster the People. Came on in Sweet Frog the other day. It's on the radio all the time. The kids know all the words. And the lyrics talk about the voice in the song is a youth who is gunning down other youth. And, you know, I had students singing the song as soon as I pulled up the track. And what I wanted them to do is say, okay, I wanted to challenge them to think about the lyrics that they are listening in today's culture and how that is media and how that is influential, and just think about that in terms of what has happened in the past. So those are some different ways that I sought to use innovative applications of the content. Now, while I believe that I did grow immensely in these areas, I believe also that I grew tremendously in my abilities to teach through collaboration. So, first I want to define collaboration. Collaboration means the act of working together with one or more people in order to achieve something. Collaboration is a word that forms a foundation of my experience as a student and as a teacher. As a student, I collaborated with high schoolers through a poetry wiki. It was my first time interacting with real students in a real school. We were able to talk together and work together to create poetry. I collaborated with my colleagues and professors on the creation of a unit where we taught English through a theme that we called Monsters. Okay? And then we also collaborated as a cohort. Okay, so in our collaboration, which was founded on Gmail and Facebook, that work and collaboration really helped me grow but it's something that I believe will continue throughout the rest of my experience. As a teacher, I collaborated with teachers. I collaborated with my own cooperating teacher. We worked together to decide what best methods of implementation. If a behavioral issue came up, we worked together to create units. I asked teachers across the content area at lunch, what should I do when this happens? What's the best way to present this material? I also collaborated with a fellow student teacher on the creation of my Diary of Anne Frank play unit, which was a great experience. I would encourage you to do that. Even beyond this, if you can collaborate with, people in your cohort and teach, even if you're in 2 different classrooms. It was a great experience, and we definitely learned a lot from each other. Collaborating with students is the area in which I experienced the most growth. So if collaboration means that you're working together to achieve something, I learned that to build a community of respect, I have to work beside them in order to better understand them and to help them be motivated. So in classroom management, for example, I really felt like I grew because I learned to work together to achieve something, and originally I really just wanted to be a friend, so I had to learn how to use that but focus more on how am I going to be an authority figure, how am I going to be a leader, being a leader more so than being a friend, and that was a huge moment of growth for me. I want to play, as my last couple minutes here, in a conclusive note, a little section of my reflection after my very last day of student teaching. It's just part of it, but it's going to help you understand kind of where I am now.
That reaction from the students, and I think they really appreciated that I wrote them a letter, because letter writing is important to me. It's something that has been a part of my life, and I wanted to give them something to take home with them. And one thing I told them in my letter to them is to remember that they are smart and that they are important, that each of them is so important, and who they are is so important. And I told them that no one can ever tell them who they are or who they need to be. They are the only people that can decide for themselves what kind of person they want to be. And I was glad that I got to leave that with them, because part of something that I want to do as a teacher is be the challenger. I want to teach the students content, yes, but even more than that, I want to teach them beyond the walls of the classroom. I want them to leave my classroom and feel better equipped to deal with their social lives, to deal with themselves, to deal with their issues, to confront the things in their life that they need to confront. And I want to teach them that who they are is important.
Okay, so that about wraps me up, and I just really appreciate the teachers and the students who have taught me all that I know now and have made me the person that I am today. So thank you.
Here's my question for you. And it kind of goes along with this community of practice term that I know you all in Professional Learning Network. But where do you get your best ideas, and where are you going to continue to get your best ideas as you go into your own classroom?
Well, when I first entered this program and we were given all these books, like I'm picking up, 5 books a semester and whatever. And at first I was really overwhelmed. I was like, there's no way I'm going to read this book, get anything out of it, and be able to put it into my practice. But through reading the likes of Kylie Beers and Jim Burks, it's not just finding out cool ways to teach the content, but it's also about learning how to understand student learning. And so reading is one way that I will continue to inform my practice and learn from, because there are a lot of texts that are being written right now that are going to inform me later. So that's one way. Another way is, I would say, through my blog. In being reflective through my blog, I heard somebody say this once, that when you speak words, when you put words out there, you give them feet. So they are put into action. So through my blog, I would say that I'm going to continue to be informed through that, because as I reflect, as I reflect, people respond to me. So I'm able to learn about what I'm doing from my classmates. I'm able to, okay, so this is my blog. But, so through blogging, I'm going to continue to inform my practice. I've gotten a lot of my greatest ideas from people in my classroom. So continuing to remain in that community and to maintain connection is going to be really important as we continue. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think your energy is fantastic, and there's no doubt you're going to be a change, element in any school. When you're teaching a student, let's say you talked about your reluctant learners, what about when you have students that just aren't getting it? Where are you going to get that drive or those ideas from or that help from? Because clearly, you're super independent, but how are you going to ask for help?
Well, I would say that in my student teaching experience, I did have specific students that were not moving. It was like, where are we going? And working with my cooperating teacher to learn how to approach that was something that really informed me. So, for example, there was one student who I felt the need that I needed to go speak to them, to conference with them and say, hey, is everything okay? Like, do we need to talk this out? And just giving the student a chance to speak to what they believe is going on was a positive experience because that gave them a little bit of power behind motivation. So that's one way. I will continue to ask questions. I am always asking, what do I need to do to achieve this? And I know going into the classroom that I don't know everything. I have already made a ton of mistakes. I'm going to continue to make mistakes, and I'm going to be okay with that. But that reluctant learner is very important, and I can't just be okay with students falling through the cracks. So asking questions is very important in getting to that point. Yeah.
With your in-test standards, same question. You use it as a backbone anyway, but which one was the hardest for you to complete, and why? All
right. So the hardest for me, although I used various forms of assessment and I feel very confident in that, is probably my task 6. So, which is assessment, right? In my magazine project, I always handed out the rubric at the very beginning of the unit. I went over the project at the very beginning of the unit so that students had that in mind as they went through. But for this group project, I hit a wall the week before this project was due because I had no way to fairly grade the students who worked really hard in the group and the students who didn't participate in the group. So in a couple days, I had to figure out how I was going to give the students who did really well in the group work a great group grade. How do I do that? And it was a struggle for me. I would say that I did persevere. I created a peer evaluation assessment where students had the opportunity to say something if it needed to be said. I made sure that they knew that their grade wasn't going to be based on that because obviously students can easily let blame fall on another student in the group when that's not necessarily the way it happened. But I would say that assessment was very hard. I made a lot of the assessment that I used made it very difficult for me as a grader. And it made me work really hard to grade. So I am still developing my methods of assessment in trying to make sure that I'm fairly grading and giving the student the grade that they deserve based on the quality of work and the knowledge that they have shown me.
I do have one other question, but this is, School in American Society, Education Foundations, Comp and Con, and Educating Exceptional Learners. Did you find that you used any material from there in your portfolio? Or did you find, where did you draw most of your artifacts from to go into your portfolio? Did you use them from, which classes did you use them from generally?
Right. I did use, one thing that I have used in my portfolio is something in content area reading, and it was a module that we created where we used text analysis to decide what level a certain reading is for students, and using a lexile analysis and really digging into a text to figure out, what student is this appropriate for. And that is included on here as one of my artifacts in my tasks. It just takes you to another website. Another thing that I think that I use in my experience, I use all these just kind of come in, but exceptional learners, learning about not necessarily even students with disabilities, but like recognizing that some students really need a visual image to be able to get text through their brain, and some students need to draw to be able to learn what's going on. One thing, I used a book, When Kids Can't Read by Kylene Beers. It was one of my lesson tryouts, and what I did was I used a vocabulary card where students were learning different vocabulary words, but they were also drawing pictures to go with the words so that they could better understand what a word means. So, well, this one obviously isn't working out. But what they did is they had a card. They would put the word here. They would put a non-example of the word, so like an antonym, and then they would write a synonym, and then they would draw a picture. So whatever comes to mind when you hear this word, draw it out, and then I had them talk about it. So that, I would say that brings in content reading, that brings in exceptional learners, and that brings in a text that I use for my methods class. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're like, when you started talking, then I actually it felt like American Idol. Weirded out for a second.
I want to. Yeah, you were appalling.
You really were.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Sorry.